Hello and welcome today. I'm your host, Febronia, and today I'm very happy to welcome Rob Volpe and Coen Tan, who are going to talk about empathy. Nice to see you. So I guess it's good afternoon, Coen, and good evening, Rob.
Yeah, this is my first 3-continent spanning podcast that I've been on. So really excited to have this conversation and get these perspectives and to be with the two of you, of course.
Well, today's a special podcast, so let me just tell the viewers a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. We had an idea to look at empathy across different parts of the world, and Rob and Coen both do a lot of work in the empathy space. So we decided to combine forces and look at the global developments in empathy work. So please, Rob, start off by telling us a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure. So I'm Rob Volpe. I'm the founder and CEO of Ignite 360. It's a marketing research and strategy firm. But we also do training, and empathy is very critical to what we do. And that our fields, which Febronia, you are part of, it's about connecting and understanding other people and how we get along, and helping our clients understand that and be inspired to create new products and services. So coming out of that, I identified things that were getting in our clients' way and other people's way to being more empathetic. And we identified that, call that the 5 steps to empathy, which we coach and train. And I wrote a book that came out last year. I'll hold it up in case anybody's actually viewing or recording. It's called Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis, One Conversation at a Time. It's available wherever people buy books on all 3 continents, audiobook, ebook, all of that as well. And it just won an award. I was really excited. Empathy won an award from the independent book publishers here in the United States. Named it one of the best self-help books of last year, which I'm really proud of.
Huge congratulations, Rob. That's fantastic news. Well done. And Coen, how about you?
First of all, congratulations, Rob. And I almost want to say, tell me more about that. But, I think we'll keep it for later. Myself, I am a wholehearted leadership coach. And I give a keynote called Wholehearted Leadership. I am on a mission to inspire leaders to lead wholeheartedly, because I personally feel that a lot of the mental well-being is predicated on wholehearted leadership in the workplace. If you think about it, people spend most of their waking hours in the workplace, and even people who are working from home now or living at work, depending on which perspective you take, having a great leader can definitely transform the way they view their work, the way they view their life, and their own self-confidence. And so I personally feel that there's plenty of opportunities for leaders to embody wholeheartedness, and of course part of wholeheartedness is empathy, in order to bring the best out of people. Imagine a world where leaders help individuals to flourish under their charge. We would be living in a much, much better world, isn't it? And I think leaders have this opportunity to do that.
That's fantastic. I mean, they're really great insights into the work that you're doing. And just to give a little bit of perspective from me, I'm using insight and empathy together to develop, great working together collaborations on projects in the insight space, but also using a lot of empathy in the coaching and mentoring work that I do, coaching in the marketing space, but also mentoring young people at university in their undergraduate trajectory. So empathy has an important role. Before we dig deep into the empathy questions, let's just tell the listeners a little bit why we decided to come together. And I guess we wanted to bring the different geographical regions together and start talking about similarities and differences across the globe. And I think it will be interesting to explore because, Rob, you're based in the US, Coen in Singapore. It will be very interesting to get some perspective on what you're seeing, especially in these post-pandemic times. So Could you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there at the moment? Is there a greater need for empathy given what we've all been through collectively?
Yes, I'll go first if that's okay. Yeah, there's definitely a decline in empathy. There's studies based in the United States that find, and work that we've done at Ignite 360 finds that anywhere from a quarter to a third of U.S. adults are unable to agree with a statement. I can easily see the point of view of somebody else. So, you think about that, up to 1/3 of the people you're going to run into today can't see your point of view, can't hear what you're saying and understand really where you're coming from, put themselves into your shoes. That's really concerning. And you see that play out in so many aspects in life here in the States, in particular from the political discourse and how aggressive and combative that's become. Social media also can be rather combative. Or just so isolated in your own bubble that you're not exposed truly to other thoughts and perspectives. So a lot of different things are happening that are hindering our ability to be empathetic. And it takes work to be empathetic. And sometimes people, when there's something a little squishy and they don't really understand what it is or how to get there, that can also just get in their way. It's like, well, why not? It feels better in the moment maybe to say something snarky or be, mean, than to actually be supportive and helpful. Although taking that latter course actually pays greater rewards, and I think you feel better over the long run. So yeah, we see it constantly. And go ahead. Sorry,
to interrupt you there. I was just thinking, so when you're saying combative, is it because people are feeling more frustrated given their lack of social connectivity? Is that what you think could be driving that?
Yeah, I mean, there's an existential crisis that we are going through and still going through as a result of the pandemic. In particular, that really triggered, who am I? What's my place in society? Who do I want to be? And then there's real existential sort of societal threats that we're wrestling with. And, there's like 5 or 6 that easily come to mind from climate change. And I think in all 3 continents, we're seeing extreme weather and situations that have never really happened before. There's worry about nuclear activity from, in the Ukraine from Russia, in Taiwan, and in China. That's real, and that we haven't had that in quite a while. There's, inflation issues. People are having trouble making ends meet in a lot of situations, so they're feeling very threatened there. That political, here in the United States, especially, if you read interviews with people from both sides of the political spectrum, they're really worried about our democracy failing and our way of living stopping and ceasing to exist. Again, existential threat. And then, by the way, the U.S. government in a hearing started to reveal that, they've got like alien biological matter that they found in a crash of a spaceship. And that was in a congressional hearing. So, they're kind of slowly introducing that little bit of news. And that's also, again, like the idea that we're not alone is going to rock people's world. So there's so many things that we're just getting challenged with. And then on top of that, social media isolates people. We claim we want to be connected, but then we order our food via an app. And we spend our time looking at our phones rather than looking up and interacting with the people around us.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. What's your perspective, Coen?
Just like to double click and build on what Rob has shared. I think COVID-19 has really been a kind of, I think we have reversed the clock somewhat, like 20 years in terms of our social and relational development. I think what we see with pandemic, with lockdowns, are people being separated. Only essential services are being able to go out to work. And also people, this mad rush, right, to the supermarkets for like toilet paper, right? And so it is like a symbol of people really going back into this fight or flight space of survival. And so when people are in a survival mode, they aren't thinking about their neighbors. They are thinking about themselves in that sense. So there is that breakdown in terms of understanding other people's perspective, because your number one focus is for yourself. So that is one thing. So I think, from a social development perspective, we have been set back like 20 years. But from a technological perspective, I think the world has just gone even faster. I think the common saying that change is the constant, I think is rubbish. Change is not constant. Change is exponential now. You look at how generative AI has just quickened the pace of information flow, and I think there's something to unpack in the middle of this, right? I think empathy is built on, psychologically, we have these mirror neurons, right? When we meet another person, just simply asking, like, how are you, Rob? And normally people will say, fine, right? But you'll be asking a second time, like, really, how are you, Rob? And it's like, fine. And we'll be asking a third time, right? This is the idea of what we call semantic differential questioning. When you ask questions like, yeah, but tell me, Rob, how are you really? And, giving people that opportunity to go beyond, to listen beyond what is just a cursory, I'm fine, right? And I think that requires a lot more time. It requires a lot more space. And it requires us to really slow down. And I think that the world is just getting faster and faster and faster. And we don't slow down enough for that mirror neurons to connect, for that neural coupling to happen that is necessary for empathy. And so I think that is something that's been setting us back.
That's all so interesting. There's so much to unpack there. Just coming back to Rob, all of those existential crises that you're talking about, it's the same in the UK. Every day we put the news on, there's just another bit of bad news. We had the news this week of a big cyber attack on the electoral roll. So 40 million households worth of data has been leaked through this cyber attack. So people are feeling very threatened. The fear is very real. And like you say, there's also the economic crisis, people grappling with inflation, being able to pay their bills, keep the roofs over their heads, feed their children. It's very real. And also this threat of warfare, it's very frightening. And what you're saying, Coen, this need for connection, this human need for co-regulating via that human connection is greater than ever before. So what do we do about all this? How do we kind of construct the empathy message to deliver in a way that helps individuals to think about these things, given that they're grappling with so much already?
Coen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. Having said all of that, there's something very, very interesting. I cannot remember the exact research, but they actually found out that the British community and society are one of the most united and together. The mental health rates are reported to be the highest during the World War II. And why is that the case? It's like you think people are bunkering up, people are hiding, bombs are falling. Why are people, measuring highest level of mental health? Because I think there is this, shared experience of, survival, this shared experience of, wanting to get through this, and together we will survive, together we'll get through this. So sometimes shared hardships can have a galvanizing effect on people, which is something that I think has got legs. It's a research that I would like to dive deeper into, however left field that may sound. Why I say that is because watch as to kind of juxtapose with what I said earlier on, I think people are retreating into this, I've got to take care of me first. And so that gets in the way of empathy. But the way to get around that is storytelling and using social media, to Rob's point. I'm starting to see a lot more people, rallying and around stories, around compelling storytelling, because storytelling is one of the fastest way for people to propagate values, for people to open up and share their vulnerabilities and saying, hey, this is my challenges, and being willing to reach out for help. I think it's very, very powerful that way. And social media doesn't have to be all about, I'm just showing how wonderful my life is. Perhaps 4 years ago, that would have been the case, right? There's this whole toxic, showcasing of all the things that's beautiful in your life, while meanwhile inside you're suffering. But I think such messages are really being very tone deaf nowadays. What I'm seeing more, even in my participation on LinkedIn, is the kind of messages that get a lot more traction, eyeballs, and engagement are typically the conversations around vulnerability, leaders reaching out and asking for help. So I think storytelling is, I'm biased because I'm a storytelling coach myself, and I think that storytelling is the way to go.
That's very, nicely put, Coen. And Rob, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree. And I think actually AI is another existential crisis for some people that, as I didn't mention in my list, because we're instantly convinced it's going to be the Terminator situation. And so anyway, the way through all of that is connection. And empathy is critical to connect. When you talk to therapists, psychologists about experiencing this sort of crisis, being in survival mode, some of that is about connecting with other people and reconnecting with the community and rebuilding community. And that's unlike World War II, which I think is a great example of when parts of the world came together in our different cultures, the US, the UK, and other places. You don't have that anymore. Things are so fragmented. I scroll through TikTok, and I just had the thought recently, like, we're not in a 500 channel universe anymore, which is what they used to talk about. It's like a 5 million channel universe. You can find, everybody has something to say, but if we're all saying something, who's listening? And I think that's part of the problem or the challenge that we're facing right now.
Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, I grew up with the saying, if you can't say something nice, then don't say anything at all. So it's so interesting to see on social media that if people see something that irritates them or irks them in some way, rather than scrolling by, they have to make some barbed comment or attack or be combative, as you said at the beginning, Rob. So interesting how this isolation has almost exacerbated this form of anger that somehow needs an outlet. And people are finding more and more ways of outletting it onto social media and trolling and all of that.
I think there's a lot of fear. Sorry, we are jumping in together. You go first, Rob.
Just speak.
Okay. I think what's also happening here, like when I talk about like what's led us to empathy crisis, and I talk about, it's unintended consequences of good intentions, and it's death by 1,000 cuts, and so there's the globalization. We're bumping into people that we would never have met before when we lived in our little towns or communities. Globalization has changed how we're interacting with each other, so that's going on. We don't let our kids get bored anymore, at least here in the United States. So, if a kid comes to a parent and goes, I'm bored, instead of being told, go up to your room and play, or, go outside and play, where they would normally then turn to creative play, role playing, things that build empathy up, they're handed a phone or a tablet, and that entertains them. And that's not creative play in the sort of mind expanding, step into the shoes of somebody else. What's it like to be a restaurant owner and to play restaurant or something like that, or a superhero? So that's going on, and kids are overscheduled now, at least here, and for various reasons. But that also takes away kids' free time, and that time an opportunity to be bored. And then there's technology, and yes, there's social media, but there's also just the proliferation of screens. I have 3 of them in front of me right now, and different devices. And how can you possibly be paying attention to other people when you've got these screens kind of sucking at your attention? And the role models and the signals we're getting from the media here, if you think about, our reality TV, which is such a tremendous amount of programming that happens now, and most of it is very competitive and it's combative. It's a zero-sum game, winner takes all, and it is about who's going to be the survivor in that show and many others. Or then you see the political shows on the news channels, and they're people just yelling at each other. So we're getting a lot of messages that it's okay to behave that way now, instead of having productive conversation. And we don't have our muscles. It's kind of like when you're out of shape, and all of a sudden you're going to exercise again, and you just don't have it. You don't have the cardiovascular, you don't have the strength. That's the situation we're in. And so people need to build muscles up so that they can go and do the event.
That's very interesting. So it's like an empathy atrophy almost, like our empathy muscle has atrophied given all of this noise around us. There was that game in entertainment that came from Asia, I think, and you can maybe help me out here, Coen. I think it was called the Squid Game.
Oh, yeah.
Were killed, and the one who lived was the survivor who had won the game. I mean, what an awful game.
Seriously, I stopped 10 minutes into the show. It was just too much for me. I'm an empath, and it was a bit too much for me. Well, I'm so glad that Rob spoke first and went first, because I was about to take this conversation in a very different direction. I'll come to that later. Just, to Rob's point, I think the muscles, right? I'd like to also bring you into this conversation, Febronia. I think you speak very eloquently about empathy. I think that we often forget, I think, the age-old tradition of dialogue and conversations. What does it mean for us to converse? I think if you break down those 2 words, verse, a verse is like a verse in the Bible or a verse in a song. A verse is a meaningful text. And to converse is to have a very meaningful exchange of text. I don't mean text messaging, but I'm talking about, a paragraph, a spoken, discourse, right? And so I personally believe that conversations are exercises in thinking together. And many people have really lost that muscles of thinking together, like what we are doing right now. We are building on each other's points. I'm building on Rob's point, I'm double-clicking on it, and then we are just like expanding this conversation. This is a fantastic exercise in thinking together, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this. However, I have to say that many people don't do this. As you say, they listen in order to respond. They listen in order to rebut. They listen in order to sound more clever or intelligent. That's almost this whole status games going on, and I think is represented in all the reality shows where status, the high status, the alpha takes it all. And so there's this whole combative and competitiveness that is really getting in the way of meaningful discourse and exercising thinking together.
It's interesting because in the coaching work that I do, and also in the study that I'm doing at business school, we spend a lot of time actually reviewing active listening and what active listening actually is, and giving somebody the space to think and to reflect and to have that generative attention. And we've got so used to speaking and firing at each other and being competitive, like you say, Coen, that we've forgotten how to do that. We've forgotten what it's like to have somebody's full attention while we think and speak. And it really is a premium. It's something so special. But when you're in a conversation and you see that the person that you're conversing with is really engaged, it really does fire up those mirror neurons, and it creates like warm connection. But like you say, Rob, we're atrophying in this department because we're not getting enough of that social interaction. So those skills are starting to erode. So that's why we're seeing more people going to therapy, going to coaches, going to mentors, because that element of conversation is just lacking in society.
And to Coen's point, I totally agree, Febronia. And to Coen's point of I can't tell you how many times somebody has sent me an email or a text and referred to it as a conversation. And it's like, no, that's communication. There's a difference between communicating and conversing. And Coen, I loved how you described that. And so as a result, we're not listening. We sit, staring at our phones, watching the three dots cycle through over and over again. Are they going to reply? Aren't they going to reply? What are they going to say? And that you're certainly not listening. And then you're taking that in order to immediately reply. And I have to think that plays out then in how we're interacting with people when we're actually in front of them or on a Zoom call. And it is just that back and forth rather than a true dialogue and conversation.
Yeah, and we're also not very good at being challenged or being receptive to other opinions. There's almost like if, this cancel culture that's emerging, if you don't fit into the box, if you don't tick the box, if you don't agree with me, then you're out, you're cancelled. But, disagreement and differing opinions is how we grow in society. It's how we develop, how we look at things from different perspectives. So this quickly scratching out or, cancelling, it's very destructive. It's very diminishing, and it's very conducive to a lack of growth, a lack of development, and actually stunting our abilities and capabilities to learn.
Yeah, I think really it's you're right. I think this cancel culture, and to your earlier point about how it's easy for people to type an angry response on social media. I think I'm a big fan of the work of Nancy Klein, who wrote this book called Time to Think. And really, I think it's a fantastic, fabulous book. And I encourage readers or listeners at home to go read Nancy Klein's Time to Think. And to Rob's point in his book, right, taking an empathetic breath, right, really just pausing and really letting, the idea to settle, to process, and allowing that breath, that in-breath and that out-breath, that space in between for us to really process the information that we are receiving, so that when we are participating in this conversation, it is truly uplifting and value-adding, and, is enriching this common pot of meaning between us, three of us right now, as we are doing, or four of us, including Domino, Rob's cat, right? So Rob's cat wants to participate as well. I mean, I think she said she's enjoying the vibration of our conversation.
For sure. That's actually Barnabas. That's the second of the three cats engaging, because, everyone loves a party. So
this is a great party. And so to that point, I think really we need to just take a collective empathetic breath in Rob's word. And also, of course, I'm also a fan of the work of Adam Grant, of rethinking, of suspending our judgment, of really questioning our own assumptions. I think that's so important.
You said something that's really resonated with me, Coen, and it's about Nancy Klein, and also what you said earlier about slowing down. I mean, Time to Think, when it was written years back, was quite revolutionary, I think, because it really changed the way people connected and coached and listened to each other in communication. But this slowing down is imperative, because if you don't slow down and be empathetic with yourself, you can't be empathetic with other people. Well, you need to start within. And I think that's really interesting what you're saying about slowing down, because just giving yourself permission to just take a pause, reflect, think, allows you then to understand what the power of that is when you give it to somebody else.
That's very true. I had to take a pause this afternoon just to kind of gather my thoughts, and I had a crazy busy day up until then, and it's like I just have to go sit and be. And I actually ended up I opened my iPad up and I started looking at the Washington Post, I think, to see what was going on, but it mentally took me away from what else I had been doing. So I had some sort of a distraction, and my brain was processing something else instead. And then I had a few minutes of just breathing and silence, then jump back in. But it's so critical. I think there's so much what I run into, and I'd be curious to hear how you guys experience it. Over here, there's so much misunderstanding around what empathy is, and the fear that, there's some very macho kind of culture still in the United States. So this is, a thing for women, or, guys shouldn't be showing their emotions, or that empathy is all about emotions. Domino's come back. She has something to say about that. And, so I spend a lot of time myth busting and helping people really just understand what it is and what it isn't. And I'm curious to know what you guys see and experience in your part of the world.
Coen, you go first.
Yeah, just remembering, Febronia, your point on my podcast about soft skills are not soft at all. They are very essential skills. It's time for us to reframe, empathy, compassion as soft skills. There's nothing soft about it at all. From my perspective, actually, in Asia, it's also not acceptable for men to cry, and so I've been raised that way. And I'm an ultra sensitive person, and I'm a highly sensitive person, and I'm a empath. So I cry a lot. I used to cry a lot when I was young. I still do cry a lot, and but I'm giving myself that permission, and I think permission is so lacking in today's culture. I think we don't talk enough about this permission, right? It's like we're always waiting for that permission to be empathetic, to let ourselves be vulnerable. I think sometimes permission is given by other people, but sometimes permission is also given by ourselves. We don't give ourselves that permission as well to just like Rob did, right? Just take a deep breath, forgive yourself, and go, I just had a really tough day, right? And like, you could also just take a breath right now and say, wow, you just had a pretty tough time with your technology, Febronia, and I can empathize with that. So sometimes it's just taking that breath and giving ourselves that permission to empathize with ourselves, and there's nothing really soft about that.
And
it's essential.
Sorry, Rob, you go next.
Sorry, what Coen was talking about, giving yourself permission to cry, because I'll tear up at many things, acts of compassion that I see, or emotion coming through on a good movie or a TV show or something, or just other things in life. But the idea that somebody has to give you permission to do that, it just struck me, Coen, you said that. I'm like, no. Your school teacher, when you were in 5th grade, gave you permission to leave the classroom to go to the bathroom. That's permission. Mm-hmm. You should be able to give yourself permission. You have power and agency over yourself. So each one of us should be able to decide how we're going to show up, and not let other people give us permission to go, wow, that was a beautiful thing I just saw, I'm going to shed a tear. Like, it's that is a construct that we need to change, and I think we're working towards changing that.
Exactly. On a note, right? Sometimes I feel we are a little hypocritical, right? It's like I say to you, hey, Rob, it's okay to be vulnerable. give me your vulnerable side. And imagine if you come into a meeting and you're sharing that, oh, you have had a really long day, you have had a really tough day, you need to take a couple of periods off, just to collect yourself. And I'm like, okay, cool. I could listen to you. I could just say, well, take it easy, man. It's nothing. It's okay. Just suck it up. You'll be fine. Right. So we rush straight into problem solving mode. And that itself is not giving permission. That itself, although on the surface I have good intention, but good intention, right, is not a proxy. I recently heard this phrase which I would like to share with you. I heard it over a podcast, and I'm actually just looking for the phrase. Good intention doesn't sanitize bad impact, right? So if I just tell you, suck it up, move on, you'll be fine. I have good intentions, but what actually that's communicating to you is that I don't care about your problems, right? Go sort yourself out, fix it, come back, and let's get going again. So we celebrate performance, we celebrate work, but we are asking people to be vulnerable. But when they're giving us their vulnerable side, we rush into problem solving. And that is communicating to them that you don't have permission to be vulnerable in this workplace. There's no space for vulnerability. There's no space for slowing down. And I think we constantly unknowingly, unconsciously send messages like that. And that's really causing people to shut down. And psychological safety is extremely key in empathy. If we were to extend empathy to others, we are also extending psychological safety to them. But if we are unconsciously sending the message that who you are is not acceptable here, people will shut down.
I think it goes deeper. I think it actually goes deeper in that in all our societies, whether Asian, American, European, there is this sense that some emotions are acceptable and others are less acceptable in society because they're more difficult to be around. However, there are no good or bad emotion. They are just emotion. And they should all be welcome. They should all be embraced because they all have their place. So if we feel angry, there's a reason why we feel angry. So it's about getting curious. Why am I angry? Why am I sad? What caused that? How do I work through it? And by negating or invalidating these emotions, we're actually doing a disservice to others and ourselves because we're not taking into account our own humanity, that it's part and parcel of who we. That's why we're not robots, because we have these sentient feelings, we have these emotions.
I'd like to think that desire to fix it, to offer the solutions, is coming from a compassionate place, where I see somebody is suffering, I have empathy with them, therefore I have compassion. It moves me to compassion, and so I'm going to try to help. Yet I think it is, I think you guys are spot on. It's negating the emotion in the moment, because sometimes you just need to feel and experience and have and express what it is. And Febronia, I think that's so wise about, anger has its place. Like it's legitimate, but get curious about it. Turn it around, turn your perspective around, get curious, maybe ask questions from the other person. Ask them what they need in that moment.
Ask more questions. As a sign behind you says.
Yeah. But that's how we atrophy, isn't it? Back to your original point, Rob, that because we're not responding to these emotions, we're not joining the dots, those muscles are atrophying because, we're saying, that's not acceptable, so we don't do it. But we forget then how to have difficult conversations. We forget how to challenge. We forget how to handle ourselves in a conflict, because we're losing that ability to use the emotions to guide us and to explore.
I'm just letting Rob think. I'm giving him time to think. Because I was going to take it in a very different direction. Yeah. Rob.
Oh, I was just going to connect the dots back to what you had said earlier, Coen. Well, that was the light bulb that was going off. on what Febronia was saying to what you had said earlier about the survival mode that we've been in the pandemic and the isolation that people were experiencing and feeling, where they've lost some of those skills. And you see that in particular with teenagers. And I've heard from either family members that have, kids of various ages, school teachers that I know, the impact that it's had on kids and their ability to handle situations, handle rejection, the range of emotions, how to interact with their friends, how to make plans to get together. Like my sister was commenting about one of my nephews. I'm presuming they're not going to listen to this, my nephews, but she was talking about how one of my nephews, the classmates, she and the parents of the classmates were noticing that the kids weren't taking the initiative to make plans to get together and to socialize. And they might do something in a pair, but there isn't like a group coming together like there used to be. And what are the longer term ramifications of that if that's something that is more widespread, where because of that isolation they were getting used to, they're now not doing group things or not having those different activities and those experiences that come along with those moments, which, good or bad, are formative. And that's why they call it your formative years.
Yeah, it's even now with all the thing about going back to the office, and there's two camps, right? People who love working remotely and people who want a yearning to go back to the office. And so people who go back to the office have this idea that, going back to the good old days, right? Team huddles, happy hours, beanbag, brown bag lunches, all hands meeting, and they talk about this in a way like it's taken for granted, but of course, right? But they seem to have no empathy or forget that there exist a bunch of people who are fresh graduates, fresh entrants into the workplace in the last 3 years. They enter the workplace at a time of lockdown. They enter the workplace having absolute no context for this whole good old days idea, because they have absolutely no context for that. We are starting to see these situations where people go back to work in the workplace in a hybrid setting, and they're meeting each other for the first time, even though they have worked together for 2 years.
Yeah. And there's another thing where there's so much work that needs to be done, and I think it's daunting for leaders on top of all the other things that you've got to deal with. Having to rethink the workplace, so that you can accommodate the hybrid and all the things. And what I had dinner with friends recently, and we were talking about, some of them had gone back to the office, and they said, one of them, he's like, I work on a remote team. So I have one colleague sitting next to me, but my manager, he's in San Francisco, his manager's in New York. He has somebody in, I think, Singapore, and somebody over in the UK. They never get together, but now he's in an office doing the Teams meeting or the Zoom call. And we really need to rethink, like, if you're going to bring people into the office, what is and it's the bonding, it's the connecting. It doesn't always have to be the happy hour, but how do you make meaningful use of that time when people are together?
Yeah, that's really important to configure that, what's the best configuration and what value is it bringing, having those people in the office when their teams are all remote.
And that's the example of empathy, the soft skill that's essential. You've got to have empathy with your employees, understand what their needs are and their wants, and they need to have empathy with you and the organization. And you've got to be vulnerable to share why this is important, even if it's just because we're spending a lot of money on real estate, or it's I like seeing people. You need to be comfortable talking about that and having that. And, that's just one of many examples where empathy is so critical.
You know what's so interesting? When we started to coordinate this discussion, I was kind of making assumptions, which I know we shouldn't do, but I was kind of making assumptions that there would be great differences across the regions in the way empathy is playing out. But what's come across to me this morning here in UK time is just how similar the challenges and difficulties are that we're all experiencing post-COVID. So what I'd like to do now in the spirit of Coen's usual style on his podcast is ask you some rapid fire questions. Is that okay?
Yep, it's ready.
So Coen, we'll start with you. What 3 things would you recommend to leaders to think about if they want to up their empathy game?
Wow. Where do we start? Okay, so a quick fire personally, I think that in our conversations today, we have been discussing about, the opposite of empathy is maybe narcissism or self-centeredness. But I personally think that the opposite of empathy can also be projection, right? To your point about how we respond and react to people on social media angrily, a lot of it is we are projecting on the people. When we are seeing people living beautiful lives on social media, it speaks to that insecure part of ourselves. And then what happens is that we project onto them and then we respond unkindly. So I think managers, leaders in today's world have to check their own projections, their own biases on a regular basis. I call this the mirror moment, right? Really spend time to pause, hit the pause button, reflect on yourself, and ask yourself what are some of the biases you're having about people, about things, about subjects that is actually getting in the way of you having more empathy and inclusivity to people. So I wouldn't say 3 things, but that's the one thing I would say.
Great. How about you, Rob? So what 3 things do leaders need to think about to up their empathy game?
Well, I'm going to take one of Coen's that he didn't play and use that. I talk about, when I give keynotes and trainings on empathy, I like to frame it up for people that there's actually 4 actions you need to be thinking about. And the first one is that self-awareness. It's time to, empathy is this ability, it's an aptitude that we have, but it's like a dimmer switch on a light. And it's time to actually raise the lights on it and have awareness of how we're showing up, where our thoughts are coming from, what we're thinking. Because that bias, those judgments that you were talking about, Coen, that projection is coming from those things. The next one is courage. I cite Maya Angelou. She had such an amazing quote one time where she said, I think we all have the ability to have empathy. We may not have the courage to display it. And I'm not talking about the courage to race into a burning building and save somebody. It's small doses of courage, that everyday courage to make a difference. Change your perspective, be curious, ask the questions, to try to actually have empathy. The next one is patience and practice, following the 5 steps, getting to know those, which is in my book, but understand the 5 steps and practice that. And the last one is having grace with yourself and with those around you. We're all human, we're trying. It's about progress, not perfection. So I will use those 4 things.
Great tip there. And Coen, what books would you recommend for people who want to learn more about this topic?
Well, maybe you should ask Rob first because I'm always answering the quick fire question first, and he's got time to think. No, I'm just kidding. I'm taking a Mickey. The book that I highly recommend, of course, Rob's book. Okay, but that's an easy way out. A book that I really recommend is Michael Ventura's Applied Empathy. And in that book, he talks about 7 archetypes of empathy. And it really does open up our minds around empathy. Instead of empathy is just this soft, squishy thing. There are many different forms of empathy, and I highly recommend Michael Ventura's Applied Empathy.
Great. And Rob, I'm opening a segue for you to plug your book. So please do feel free, but also give us another book that you'd recommend.
I have several. I happen to have a stack of books that aren't just my own nearby. So that's what I was reaching for. But first one would be my book. Tell me more about that.
Solving the Empathy Crisis.
But the thing. My book sets the table. It basically gives you the basic understanding of what empathy is, what it isn't, and what the 5 steps are. So that's the kind of toolkit that you can start to draw from, and then you can start to use it in other places. A really great book that came out this year is Purposeful Empathy by Anita Nowak. And this book, she has looked at all the different studies and really talks and looks holistically at empathy and all the different work that's being done. So it's a really one of the most comprehensive sort of assessments of empathy in the moment, and also has some practical tips. Book that I'm reading right now, it's an advanced copy. I was talking about this before the show started, but it comes out October 3rd, and it's Speak Up Culture by Stephen Chedletsky. You can pre-order it right now. It's all about, it gets into psychological safety and how to actually have a speak up culture and to create a culture. So if you're a leader, you want to make sure that you don't just have yes men, but in order to do that, you've got to actually create space where people do feel comfortable to actually speak up and step in and say, this is what I think is wrong, and here's what we might need to do about it. So those are three that I would recommend.
Fantastic. And I'll throw one into the pot. Following on from Coen's recommendation of Time to Think from Nancy Kline, I'll recommend The Promise That Changes Everything from Nancy Kline, which just explores in a little bit more depth this idea of giving generative attention when actively listening, and the power that yields in terms of building connection, trust, psychological safety, and all those wonderful things. So great. So it's been a fantastic conversation today. So how can those that are listening to the podcast on LinkedIn connect with you guys?
I'll go first, Coen, so you can think. Yeah. So you can follow me here on LinkedIn, Rob Volpe, VOLPE. If Instagram is another thing, find me at Empathy Activist, or you can go to my website, which is robvolpe.expert.
Thank you, Rob. And how about you, Coen?
Well, you can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look for Coen Tan, COENTAN. So that's Coen Tan, and on IG is also at Coen Tan, COENTAN, and you can go onto my website, coentan.com, and send me an email at connect@coentan.com. If any questions that you have and you'd like to have them answered, any comments, I'm happy to receive your comments and engage with you in a conversation and not a communication, as Rob said earlier on. So I'm always looking out for uplifting conversations, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
And Febronia, I can be reached on LinkedIn as well. You can DM me or connect with me. I'd just like to say thank you to Rob and Coen for a great conversation today. It's been a joy. It's been a great, fun experience. Really enjoyed it. So I hope you all enjoyed the conversation, and thank you to everybody for participating and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This has been so much fun.